Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulil Kareem. Amma ba'd. Much of the details in terms of the rules of zakat, I think, have been covered already. I'm just going to cover a few areas, and then inshallah we'll go into the working out of zakat very briefly, and then into the Q&A session. The topic that I've been asked to discuss is the topic of nisab. This word has been discussed a few times and come up a few times during the course of our discussions this evening. What is nisab? So to understand nisab very simply, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't made zakat obligatory on every Muslim individual, as we've heard. A person has to have a certain amount of wealth for zakat to be obligatory on that person's wealth. If he does not qualify, then zakat is not obligatory on him. So what is that amount of wealth? That is what nisab would determine for us, or what nisab would direct us towards. In the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know trade would take place in gold and silver. So there was gold coins and silver coins. There wasn't paper money like we have today. And the silver coins were called the dirhams, and gold coins were called dinars. In the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the gold nisab for gold that was set by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Mubarak hadith is 20 dinars. So if a person owned 20 dinars, then he was regarded as a wealthy person over and above his expenses. In other words, excess wealth of 20 dinars if a person owned, then he was considered to be a wealthy person, and he owned nisab. And if, in terms of silver, if a person owned 200 silver coins, 200 dirhams, then that person was a wealthy person and he qualified to pay zakat. Now we don't have gold and silver coins, so how does that apply to us? For our purpose of our ease, or for ease, the ulama have converted the value of 20 dirhams and 20 dinars into grammage and into a weight. So the 20 dinars which were prevalent in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it equates to 87.48 grams. These details are given in this note here. 87.48 grams. So if a person has 87.48 grams of gold today, we will say that person owns nisab. Now let's take a few examples, otherwise I think we'll get lost. Let us say a lady gets married. It's a simple example. A lady has no wealth before she gets married. The day she gets married, her husband gives her as mahar, or for whatever reason, he gives her gold. And the gold she receives from him as mahar, for example, is 100 grams. So she now becomes the owner of nisab. Okay, so now she becomes a wealthy person, and zakat is due on her. As we go along, we'll discuss the rule of 1 year. If the same lady gets married, and she's given silver. So the 200 dirhams, if we equate it into our current value, it would be 612.36 grams of silver. So she is given silver jewelry equivalent to 1,000 grams. So now we will say she has the equivalent of nisab. She is wealthy, zakat is due on her. The question arises, what if she's given cash as mahar, for example, or she's given gold and silver, or she's given cash and gold? We're just using this as an example to make it easy for us. In the instance where a person has more than one type of zakatable wealth, what would be the nisab then? Person has gold and silver. We know the value of 20 dinars, or 87 grams of gold, and 600 odd grams of silver. The values there's a huge difference in the values. So which value would you use? The ulama have decided, there's one principle that runs through the masail of zakat, and that is they will always base a rule in terms of where there is greater benefit for the poor. So in which context would the poor benefit to a greater extent? More poor people would receive zakat, they would receive a larger amount of zakat. That's taken into consideration. So they say you would take the value of 87.48 grams of gold. What is that value today on the market? And the 600 grams of silver, what's the value of that on the market? The lower of the two would form the nisab value. So we see every month on the Jamiat roster, that calendar that comes up, we see a nisab amount. That nisab amount is 612.32 grams or 612.36 grams of silver, the value on the day when that calendar was printed, that is the value of that silver. So that is the nisab, because gold is much more expensive than silver. And if you will lower the nisab amount, more people will give zakat and more people will be classified as being wealthy. And because of that, more poor people will benefit. So that is nisab. The minimum of the two between gold and silver. If a time comes where 87 grams of gold is lesser in value to the 612 grams of silver, then that would form the basis of the nisab. So therefore, if a person, let's just say for example, this lady was given 10,000 rand as mahar. She's received no gold and no silver, then we would see what is the minimum. Like in our example, in our context, it is the silver, roughly between 4,000, 4,500 rands. She has in excess of nisab, she will pay zakat. Person opened a business and he has maybe a small little tuck shop. He has stock worth 5,000 rands and maybe some capital worth 2,000 rands. That's in excess of nisab. Okay, so he will become, he is zakatable. So that is the understanding of nisab. Once a person has nisab, so if there's more than one type of wealth, you look at the minimum of the value between gold and silver, that would form the nisab. If a person has only gold, then it will be the 87.48 grams. If a lady was given gold as mahar, 50 grams of gold, even though it might be worth 10,000 rands, more than the nisab of silver, she will not pay zakat because she does not have sufficient gold. And the same would apply in the silver as well. But if a person has more than one type of wealth, then you would see what is the minimum between the gold and silver, and that would form the nisab. Once a person understands that he has nisab now, then zakat becomes due on the person. So we call it nafsul wujub. At that point in time, zakat is wajib on a person. But there's another concept in Shariah which is called wujubul ada. In other words, when is it now wajib to pay that? So at that point, zakat is wajib on that person because he is wealthy. But when does he have to pay it? So he has to pay it 1 year later. And it's important, there's few rules are very important that we need to keep in mind. One is that we need to stipulate a zakat date. And that also in terms of the lunar calendar, not the solar calendar. In other words, according to the Islamic calendar. If a person is going to use the English calendar over a period of 30, 33 years, a person would not discharge 1 year's zakat. So he will fall short in paying 1 year's zakat. Therefore, a person needs to stipulate an Islamic date. Now many of us would say, people will phone the office and they say that we pay zakat, and we ask them, what is your zakat date? They say it is end of Shaban. Which day in end of Shaban? No, just end of Shaban. Now why it's important is because there's fluctuation in our wealth, and as we go along we'll understand it. So we need to stipulate one date. We say in the month of Ramadan, or the first beginning of Ramadan or end of Ramadan, it's important that we stipulate a date. So if we say in the beginning, and if we don't have a date, then we should try and stipulate a date from now on. If we don't have a date and we haven't paying zakat, it's important that we stipulate a date. But zakat is not only due in the month of Ramadan. We need to understand that zakat is not due in the month of Ramadan. This lady, for example, that got married, let's take another example. There's no ladies here, we're only speaking about mahar. So let's say a youngster came out of university, got a job, or he got a job, and he started working, and he got his first salary paycheck on the 1st of Rajab, for example. On the 1st of Rajab, that would be his zakat date. He has no expenses, he's still living with his parents, he's not married, they don't ask him for anything, no groceries, no rent or anything, and he is now saving his money. So we would say that the 1st of Rajab is that person's zakat date. So a person that doesn't have a zakat date, that doesn't know, we need to stipulate. But as our children that become baligh, we might have banking accounts for them. The day they become baligh, if they have wealth in excess of nisab, then until they are na baligh, they are not baligh, there's no zakat due on their wealth. But the day they become baligh, zakat becomes due on their wealth. So if they became baligh, for example, on the 5th of Shaban, that would be the zakat date. The next year on the 5th of Shaban, zakat would be due. So that's important, we need to stipulate a zakat date. The second important thing to understand is that we work in zakat from year to year. Mufti Sahib did allude to it in his discussion, that zakat is paid 1 year later. Now there's this misunderstanding in the community that I need to have this wealth for 1 year, and if I have it for 1 year, then I'll pay zakat on it. Otherwise, I won't pay zakat on it. Now, for business people, how would you be able to know that which the stock that you have in your business is there for a year or not? And every business wants to turn his stock over every season. So perhaps a person would never end up paying zakat on his stock because he doesn't have it. We hear people saying that my father passed away and I was paid out inheritance 2 months ago, and now my zakat is due on me, so do I have to pay zakat or not? The rule of zakat is, the person started working on the 1st of Rajab, for example, he got 10,000 rand as his salary. Every month thereafter he received 10,000 rand, he had no expenses, just for a simple example. Next year on the 1st of Rajab, he has 120,000 rand in his bank account, for example. The 1 year hasn't passed on the whole 120,000 rand. But the next year, whatever amount of wealth he has, zakat is due on that entire amount. Zakat is not only due on the 10,000 rand that he had 1 year ago. So the 1 year is, from the time a person becomes the owner of nisab, he will wait for 1 year to pass before he discharges his zakat. It does not mean that on every bit of zakatable wealth, 1 year must pass for zakat to become due on that wealth. Therefore, the zakat calculation is very, very simple. So on the 1st of Rajab, the person had 10,000. The next year, 1st of Rajab, he has 120,000. All he'll do is say 2.5% of 120,000, and that's how he'll discharge his zakat. During the year, if a person's wealth went below nisab, so if a person had 10,000 rand at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year, 120,000 rand, in the middle of the year, there's a fluctuation. He might have decided, okay, I need to purchase a motor vehicle. So he purchased a motor vehicle and he paid a deposit on his motor vehicle. And he now, that he's, or let's just say after 6 months, he now has 60,000 rand, and he purchased a motor vehicle for let's say 55,000 rand. Or let's say 57,000 rand. He's left with a balance of 3,000 rand. That 3,000 rand is below the nisab. Even though it's below the nisab, the condition is at the beginning of the year he must have nisab, end of the year he must have nisab. He has both, he will pay the zakat at the end of the year. Even though after 6 months he now only has 3,000 rand, which is below nisab. Yes, if he at the end of 6 months he now purchases a motor vehicle for 60,000 rands, and he only has 60,000 rand, which means all his zakatable wealth is depleted now. Then now zakat, when he now becomes the owner of nisab again, he will start commencing another year from there on. Then a new year will start for him. But otherwise, as long as a person has nisab at the beginning of the year, the next year, whatever amount of zakatable wealth the person has, zakat would be due on that entire amount. So that's the basic understanding of zakat. Once a person understands this aspect of nisab, a person would tabulate all his zakatable wealth, his zakatable assets that were already outlined, the cash, the gold, silver, and deduct from there the current liabilities. So current liabilities are liabilities that were identified, as well as any liability that is payable within a period of 1 year. So if a person took a loan from someone and he said, I will repay it within a year, then that entire amount is deductible as a current liability. Anything longer than 1 year is considered as a long-term liability. Only 1 year's installments can be deducted as a current liability, not the entire debt or the entire liability can be deducted as a liability. So we have our asset, we deduct our liabilities from there, and on the net, whatever is left over, the net value of our estate or our zakatable wealth, 2.5% is due on that at the end of when we calculate our zakat. There's a few rules in between. One is that once the zakat becomes due on our wealth, we said a person has nisab, it's due next year, the 1st of Rajab. There's some calamity that happens, there's difficulty, Muslims are experiencing difficulty, or someone comes to us and says, someone needs zakat, or we need to send some money to Syria, for example. Can a person pay before the year has ended? Yes, a person can pay before the year has ended, but it's important that he recalculates at the end of the next year, or the end of the year rather, and sees, has he paid sufficient zakat or not? So he's paid, for example, 5,000 rands, and he calculates at the end of the year, he realizes that I only needed to pay 4,000 rand is sufficient. But if he needed to pay 6,000 rand, for example, then he will make up the 1,000 rand. But you can pay zakat in advance Once a person becomes the owner of nisab, you can pay zakat in advance. You don't have to wait for the 1 year to end. Some rules that come, or some questions that generally come about, or maybe we'll cover this one, is with regard to who can accept zakat. So there's a difference between paying zakat, being wealthy in terms of paying zakat, and wealthy in terms of receiving zakat. So a person might not own nisab, okay, but every person that does not own nisab does not automatically qualify for zakat. Let me repeat that. A person might not be paying zakat. So a person has his net zakatable wealth is 3,000 rands less than his zakatable, less than nisab. He does not have to pay zakat. Does it mean that this person is poor, that you can't give him zakat? It does not automatically mean that a person can accept zakat if he does not pay zakat. A person can receive zakat only if he does not have any wealth in excess, any excess wealth equivalent to nisab. Let me just make it more simpler. If a person has, let's say there's the same person who has 3,000 rands. So he doesn't have nisab. In his home, he's got furniture, a bed, for example, which are his necessities, a stove, appliances, which are the necessity. So those are not taken into consideration. But he's got ornaments which he does not need. Okay, the ornaments could be given to him as a gift. He could have purchased them. Let's say the ornaments in his home, which is not a necessity, is in the region of 3,000 rand. So he has 3,000 rand in zakatable wealth and 3,000 rand in non-zakatable wealth. So combine the two, he has in excess of nisab, even though the 3,000 is non-zakatable wealth, then too he cannot accept zakat. Any wealth that the person has over and above his basic needs and necessities, which comes to the value of nisab, that person cannot accept zakat. And that, generally the question arises of, person has a television in his home, so can we give him zakat or not? So a person having a television in his home does not necessarily disqualify a person from accepting zakat. The understanding behind it is, if the television set is not a person's basic need and necessity. So if a person has a television set, which perhaps 5,000, 10,000 rands in excess of nisab, person has no other zakatable wealth, person doesn't have anything else in his home, he has no liabilities, doesn't owe anyone money, but because he's got some wealth which is in excess of nisab, you cannot give that person zakat. That is why it's so important for people to be very mindful when we give, to who we give our zakat, and that is why people that, or organizations and individuals that do discharge or assist people in discharging the zakat generally do house visits. Because the house visit will generally give an indication to a person, does this person have any excess wealth, anything which he doesn't need in his home, for whether, and whether he would qualify to accept zakat or not. I don't want to go into too much more detail. I think maybe we can open the floor for questions, if there are any, inshallah. Okay, the one important point to raise is that you don't join the estate or the zakatable wealth of a husband and wife together to determine whether they qualify for zakat or not. So the lady might have inherited from her parents, or she has gold, but the husband does not have. It doesn't mean because the wife has gold equivalent to the nisab that makes the husband wealthy. So if he does not have anything, then he is poor, she is wealthy. You can give the husband zakat, you can't give the wife zakat. Yes, but if let's just say both of them do have, he's inherited from his mother, for example, and they don't want to part with it because of sentimental value, and it is equivalent to nisab, then you cannot give them zakat. Yes. An important point is that when a person discharges zakat, when you give the money of zakat, you must have an intention of zakat, or up to the point that the wealth is still in the hands of the poor person. So, person came to you, and you know he's poor, he does qualify for zakat, you've given him some money, and then you realize, I needed to give some zakat. As long as that wealth is in the person's hand, you can make the intention, you can change your intention from sadaqah into zakat. Once that money has been used you cannot now make an intention. So you have to have an intention of zakat at the time of giving the wealth. As I said, the latest point up to the point that the person spends it. So and the reason why we raise this is because people, sometimes people are owing us money in our businesses, and we'll say we'll write this debt off as zakat. That cannot be done. Because at the time when the goods were given or the money was given, there was no intention that I'm giving this as zakat. Money has been used up, the goods have been sold already. Now you cannot make an intention of zakat with that. The rule is that you don't have to pay for the years that, during the years that he hasn't paid you. Zakat is due on that wealth, but you don't have to pay it upfront. So you have two options. You can pay it each year, or you can pay for the 3 years when he pays you. But basically, zakat is due for every year. In our circumstance, in our context, motor vehicle is a necessity of life. Yes, you also see the nature of an asset. Sometimes a person, we hear of it in wealthy communities. We don't know if it's existent, whether it's just a joke. Person purchases a house, and way beyond his necessity, 5 million, 8 million, whatever. And now he says, I'm in debt, so I can take zakat. Okay, that's beyond his necessity. So person can afford a simple car, that's his need. If a person purchases a very expensive vehicle, now he says, I'm in debt. Obviously, we'll advise him that you need to sell this vehicle first, because that's maybe taking and consuming so much of your salary, for example. Zakat is generally due from the wealth on which zakat is due. So, for example, a person has a clothing business, zakat is due on the clothing, that's your stock. Person has a motor vehicle business selling motor vehicles, zakat is due from the motor vehicles. You can take out 2.5% worth of the motor vehicles, it comes to 2-3 motor vehicles, and give it away to poor people. So that's the actual rule. You can change, but can you give zakat in another form? So you can give zakat in another form. So zakat is due on the motor vehicles in your motor sales business. You can take it out in the form of cash. So you can give it in another form, but it must be it must be equivalent to the value of that in which it's been taken out. So, for example, you need to give 10,000 rand of zakat, and you give it as groceries, then it will be on the value of the groceries. I think we can terminate the program. Everyone's tired also. There's many senior ulama here in the community, so you can refer your questions to them. More capable than us.
Anybody has any other questions, inshallah, you can send an email to Mufti Saab at the head office. He will answer it, inshallah. And if not, then if you don't have his email number, Ma Yusuf is also always here. We'd like to thank our honorable guests. They're driving all the way back. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take them safely. May Allah ta'ala accept their coming and make it a means of najat and salvation for them and for us, and a means of barakah for them and for us. And inshallah, we hope this is actually a Jamiat Ulama South Africa outreach program where they've been going for the past 4 or 5 years now, different parts, or more also, I think, of the country, where they go and conduct relevant and pertinent workshops. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept